I've carved out a lot of time the past couple of, especially since kind of the new year started, for LSAT, and I'm really, so much of my like mood and everything is really dictated by a lot of my practice tests and stuff to maybe an unhealthy amount. And I do find that, I mentioned this in the email. I started kind of timing myself more about a month ago, like really kind of just bit the bullet and started doing the strict 35-minute time limit, and didn't really do the weaning down, which in the beginning was hard, but I do think that I am improving on, on the time. I'm really struggling with games, obviously, because that's something I had banked on doing pretty well on, and now it's kind of become my worst section purely for time reasons, which is frustrating. But I am exhibiting a lot of the this kind of got hit a really bad peak about 2 weeks ago, and I've been doing a lot of research, and people have kind of been saying, if you're at a point where you feel like you can't even bear to look at another LSAT question, you are experiencing that burnout, you need to take a couple of weeks off, but I'm taking this exam in a couple of weeks, and so I'm just kind of struggling on like how to kind of best make use of these, last 3 weeks going into the March. I'm taking the exam in London on March 28th. Hopefully I'm taking it March 28th, considering kind of everything that's going on, but they haven't said anything about the exam, so I am assuming that it's still on. But I'm, I don't know if it's helpful for me to kind of go through the different sections and talk about, how I've been doing on average, or if you have any advice right off the bat about how to kind of deal with these next few weeks. Obviously, I do think I'm going to end up taking the LSAT again, but not until the fall. But, I do want to make the most out of these next 3 weeks without feeding this burnout, because it can get to a point where I feel like you get a little bit of diminishing returns. You start to do worse on practice tests, and that's really bad for me psychologically, obviously.
Sure. I do have some thoughts off the bat. And I think that the biggest picture issue that you've raised around burnout and what to do with a few weeks out is actually going to be more impactful for you than discussing section-specific strategies or even question-specific strategies, because, of course, there's a lot out there about all of that already. You're in the courses, you have the resources. Right. I don't think you necessarily need more strategies or different strategies. I think that we've got to look at what's going on for you in terms of your mindset. You mentioned earlier that your mood and your how you're feeling is tied to your score going up and down. You even said directly that you're exhibiting some of the symptoms of burnout, and you've only got a few weeks left. You've got the March 28th LSAT coming up, but you're also planning to likely retake it down the line several months from now.
Right.
So I'd like to get into that a little bit. In your email to me, I remember you also mentioned that you really want to have a score on record, just so that you've got something concrete that you can later move past potentially. So I'd love to get into more of that with you. Could you tell me more about your motivation for wanting to have a score on record now?
Yeah, I think, so I had initially, when I first started this whole LSAT studying process, wanted to take it right after I graduated in May, and I wanted to take it in July, and I just wasn't ready at all. I ended up canceling my test score about a week, sorry, I didn't cancel the test score. I didn't take the exam at all. I canceled my registration about a week or two before. I get really bad test anxiety. I find it, I've never really been good at exams. And I felt like, I think it was clear to me probably in January that my goal of kind of hitting the late 160s or like 170s range just seemed really far away. And that rather on kind of going into the spiral of like, you're not going to be at your goal score by March, I figured still take it in March. I'm taking the paper exam, which I think will be my last time to really take a paper exam anyway, because I'm doing it abroad. I'll probably be in America by the time I'm taking the next one. So, I think, I know it sounds bizarre and it's hard to explain, but just knowing that I'm taking this exam later on down the line because I want to and not because I have to, knowing that it's not my last chance to take the exam before the fall admission cycle starts if I want to apply, in the fall. Knowing that that's not my last chance just psychologically helps me. So, I mean, I'm in a much better place now than I was in the summer. I may not be where I want to be, but I am consistently getting like 158 to 160 on my practice exams. And, if that is something that I'm consistently getting and I get that, I know that's something that can get me into law school, like a law school, maybe not my top choice, maybe not my top three choices, but it could be, something there. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that was kind of my thought process going into it, was like, this is just keep doing what you've been doing, keep taking your practice tests. It's just like another practice test. And then, we'll cross the rest when we get there.
Right, right. So what I'm hearing from you is that a 158 or 160, it may not be your ultimate goal score, but that is a score range that you would be okay with applying to law school.
Yeah, like I think I definitely would still want to bring up my LSAT score from there, but yeah, I mean, it's not the end of the world kind of thing, like um I definitely think that I definitely did want to push for a much higher like LSAT score, but just given how like consistently my practice tests have been not in that range, despite a lot of the drills and prep work and videos and chapters of different books and stuff that I've read, I don't think it's realistic for me to expect that it will be any different on test day. I'm the only thing that helps my test anxiety is knowing that I've prepared and I've tried several times and I've consistently gotten the results several times. I don't think that any wishful thinking is helpful, going into these exams. So I think it was more just a reality of the situation given the time kind of thing, if that makes sense.
Sure. And are you especially concerned about the transition to the digital LSAT and taking it in the digital format back in North America?
I am a bit, yeah. I think like there are a couple of things that I am curious to see how it will play out. Like, for example, I haven't done too much reading and I've never actually tried one, but like I know that like you get scratch paper for games, which I think actually might be more helpful than the system right now. But yeah, it definitely does stress me out a little bit, especially for logical reasoning and even reading comprehension a little bit. Like it just seems like you just get used to taking a format in one way, and it just seems like something that could really mess me up, especially on time.
Yeah. Well, there are certainly pros and cons to the digital. It's nice to know that you're going for the paper LSAT right now. And then if you retake in the fall, which it sounds like you might, then you'll have several months to prep for the digital LSAT format specifically.
Right.
And knowing that, as you said, there's a certain comfort that you have the chance to retake in the future, and that this one LSAT coming up in March is not the end all be all. So it's your last
Yeah.
chance to do paper, most likely, but not your last chance to take the LSAT, period. And whatever happens for you, law schools consider the higher score. So you might get
Right.
158 now, and then in the fall, you could get 165. You could do better than that. Who knows, with several months of prep. And maybe
Right.
the digital LSAT format ends up suiting you better with the benefit of the scratch paper. So just
Yeah.
know that it's not all riding on one particular test date.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, the other thing that's like worth mentioning, I think, is that, like I took the past couple of days and like the entire weekend completely off from LSAT. Like I wasn't thinking about it, doing it at all, because I just felt like, I usually would never do that. The weekend is actually when I tend to really get a lot of the bulk of like work done. But I took a practice test this morning and, ended up doing okay. I got a 161, and I actually was feeling really not confident about it when I was doing it, like before I graded it, and I did better kind of than I expected to do. And I even ended up finishing a reading comprehension section within the 35 minutes. So more so than the score, I do notice finishing with the practice that I do notice finishing in the 35 minutes to get easier and easier over time. Like if there's one thing that I can actually say progressively is tracking better, it's just my comfort with the time limit with each week that goes by. And so I'm trying to kind of think like, how many practice tests do you think a week leading up to this exam is helpful? Because I do find that the drill of doing those questions in 35 minutes is a helpful thing for me, even though that accuracy of it is still kind of something that I struggle with. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to take too much time away from the studying time leading up to the exam, because I don't want to feel like I could have done more to prep with the time portion of the exam. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, certainly. Pacing is important.
Yeah.
Pacing is important. Endurance is important. My rule for this is generally maximum 2 exams per week timed and a minimum of 2 hours reviewing each exam. So max 2 exams per week, and you've got less than a month now, about 3 weeks as we speak. So maybe you're going to do 6 more timed exams total, maximum. And also minimum 2 hours reviewing each of those exams. And if you want to mix in some individual timed sections here and there to really work on that 35-minute benchmark, you could do that. You could also progressively decrease your time so that you're starting off with 40 minutes per section, then 39 minutes per section, then 38, all the way down to 35. And then maybe even to really push the needle a little bit, go down to 33 minutes per section to give yourself a buffer to go back and tackle the toughest questions that you may have flagged earlier in the section. Just things to play with.
Yeah. And like, I think, oh, sorry, I was going to ask something I blanked after I listened to your answer. Oh, right. Do you find that like with games, for example, and I don't know if this is something that's really like if the time limit is particularly hard for people with games, or if that's just a me thing, like, or if that's common with students in general, because that was the most surprising one for me. I think I knew that I was going over the time limit, but I didn't realize how much time it took me to do the game sections when I wasn't, being timed. Do people have do they just choose not to do a game altogether and strategically kind of pick which games they think are easiest, or do you recommend just kind of going along, game by game and skipping around questions that you think?
So I'll tackle both the local example here and then zoom out to the bigger picture of timing in general. So for games, there are some people who do only 3 games and skip the hardest one, perhaps. And they find that their accuracy generally improves if they have more time to do 3 of the games and leave out 1 altogether. At the same time, though, that is setting a certain limit or ceiling on your overall potential. If you leave out an entire game, that's likely 5 or 6 questions. You're going to get maybe 1 or 2 of those right at most, guessing blindly. And so you're going to lose 4 to 5 points off the bat. If you want 160 plus or 165 plus, I would generally recommend doing all 4 games. And I think that's what's going to serve you best, is my intuition here, is doing all 4 games, attempting every question on the exam in general. Yeah. Whether you do that for March specifically or not, I'm not so concerned, because we already have in mind for you that you're likely to retake in the fall anyway. But I would also experiment, play around. If you're doing 6 timed exams over the next 3 weeks, maybe on a couple of them you leave out a game, maybe on a couple you do a game, all 4, or maybe you practice this with individual timed sections so as not to taint your overall practice test score results. But as for the exam as a whole, yes, students always find all sections the exam to have difficulty with the time constraint, because it is a very strictly timed exam, to the point that it's actually not reasonable to ask most people to do everything in the time allotted. They're really pushing you on this because they want people to run out of time. They want you to rush. because that's when you're more likely to make careless errors, which is what they're looking
Right.
for people to do.
Right. And that's the big thing that I've come across with logical reasoning. It used to be that I couldn't, finish the last 4 questions of logical reasoning. And now I can finish all of them. But I do find myself getting really frustrated with going back and looking at answers. Before I've even looked at the right answer, I've already kind of found the kind of careless error that I've made in the question. Um, do you have like, how is the best way to kind of go about reviewing? I mean, you said 2 hours to review each exam, and I do review my exams I review the missed questions pretty thoroughly, I would say, but 2 hours is like a lot longer than I would have expected, I think, to be the norm of how long it would take. What exactly do you recommend? How do you approach reviewing these exams so that it's the most effective for studying?
Yeah, sure. I actually taught an hour-long class on this recently, and I'll send you the link to it afterwards, where I go in depth on review strategies. But basically what I call the Socratic review method, where you analyze where your misunderstanding stemmed from. Was it the stimulus, the question stem, or the choices, if we're talking logical reasoning as an example? You want to figure out which particular tricks and traps the LSAT makers laid for you and which ones you were prone to falling for, so you can avoid making the same mistakes again. So you want to see specifically to reverse engineer how they constructed the exam and what ramped up the difficulty level of the question. Like maybe it was requiring you to take the contrapositive, or linking together conditional statements, or using difficult vocabulary words, or framing things in an unfamiliar or confusing way. And then with the answer choices, what specifically about the wrong answer made it seem appealing to you, and what ultimately made it wrong, and what was discouraging about the right answer that pushed you away from it, and what ultimately made it correct. And you can note all of this in a mistake journal or log to keep track of the mistakes that you're making. And then you could even redo those questions a week later, a month later, several months later. And this is, of course, for you with the fall LSAT in mind for a retake. But
Right.
articulating things is really important, so that you're not just saying, I get it now, and moving on.
Okay. Okay. So it sounds like, leading up to the exam, I'm going to aim for doing 2 practice tests a week and giving myself a day, 2 days or a day in between for each practice test to really thoroughly review it. That is helpful. I think it's just, like I am ready to, I think, take it and have a bit of a break, especially since right now I am in a master's program. My master's program, luckily, for the past couple of months has been pretty lax, which is why I've been able to spend as much time doing LSAT. But I feel like I just am not capable of studying for the LSAT without getting burnout. It's really all or nothing for me. This happened in the summer as well. And maybe just working on strategies to study for this exam long term without it consuming so much of my emotional energy in life would be helpful to talk about in the
Yeah,
future.
certainly. I'd be happy to. And I can certainly relate. I mean, obsession is both a blessing and a curse, right? And we have to figure out ways to manage it and channel it appropriately. And so I
Yeah,
think that'll be a good topic for our next call.
definitely. Okay. Thank you so much. And the video on the reviewing the LSAT exams would be really
Yeah, I'll
helpful.
send it over to you, definitely.
Okay,
And before we sign
cool.
off, what would you say is the biggest insight you got from our call today?
I think um, I think I was really surprised by the 2 hour review time, honestly. But also from, I think, just uh, kind of the more mindset approach to this exam, and kind of just thinking about very practical things that I can do between now and then. Just I think eased my mind, because I do often feel like you're not doing enough, you're not doing enough, kind of spiral. I think getting the insight that like actually just continuing to follow this regimen is all you can do was helpful. Like having that validated was helpful. Um, and then, yeah, I think that was probably like the best thing that came out of this, as well as just um, talking about like different approaches to time. The timing strategies was a good insight. I haven't weaned off time just because I just haven't tried that strategy before, but it might be something I try maybe if I decide to retake. Playing around with the time frames and stuff was good insight.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.